conflict between the United States and Russia is not merely a contemporary political dispute but a long-standing struggle rooted in history, ideology, power competition, and global influence that has shaped international relations for decades, beginning most clearly after the Second World War when the world emerged divided between two opposing systems, with the United States championing capitalism, liberal democracy, and free markets, while the Soviet Union promoted communism, state control, and a fundamentally different vision of society and governance, and this ideological clash gave rise to the Cold War, a period defined not by direct military confrontation between the two superpowers but by proxy wars, espionage, propaganda, economic competition, and a relentless arms race that pushed both nations to accumulate massive nuclear arsenals capable of destroying the planet many times over, with moments such as the Cuban Missile Crisis bringing humanity perilously close to nuclear annihilation, demonstrating how fragile global peace had become under the shadow of mutually assured destruction. And although the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 led many to believe that this era of confrontation had ended, and that the United States had emerged as the sole global superpower, the reality proved far more complex as Russia, weakened economically and politically in the 1990s, gradually sought to reclaim its status, dignity, and influence on the world stage, particularly after Vladimir Putin came to power and emphasized national strength, military modernization, and resistance to what Moscow perceived as Western encroachment and humiliation, especially through the eastward expansion of NATO, which Russia viewed not as a defensive alliance but as a direct threat advancing toward its borders despite earlier assurances that such expansion would not occur, creating deep mistrust and resentment that would later erupt into open confrontation, particularly in regions historically tied to Russian security interests, such as Ukraine and Georgia, where popular movements seeking closer ties with the West were interpreted by Moscow as externally engineered efforts to pull these countries out of Russia's sphere of influence, leading to conflicts that hardened positions on both sides, with the annexation of Crimea in 2014 marking a major turning point as the United States and its allies condemned the move as a violation of international law and imposed sweeping economic sanctions on Russia, while Russia justified its actions as necessary to protect ethnic Russians and its strategic interests, arguing that Western intervention in Ukraine's political process had crossed a red line. And from that moment onward, relations between Washington and Moscow deteriorated rapidly, with accusations flying in multiple domains including cyber warfare, election interference, disinformation campaigns, and covert operations, as the United States accused Russia of hacking political institutions and manipulating public opinion to undermine democratic systems, while Russia countered by accusing the United States of hypocrisy, pointing to its own history of foreign interventions, regime change operations, and unilateral military actions in countries such as Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan, claiming that American rhetoric about democracy and human rights often masked a deeper pursuit of geopolitical dominance, and this mutual distrust extended into the Middle East where the Syrian civil war became another arena of confrontation, with the United States supporting certain opposition forces and Russia intervening militarily to support the government of Bashar al-Assad, demonstrating Moscow's determination to assert itself as a decisive power capable of shaping outcomes beyond its immediate neighborhood. And as these regional conflicts unfolded, the nuclear dimension of the Russia rivalry remained an ever-present and deeply alarming factor, as both countries continued to modernize their nuclear forces even as arms control agreements that had once provided a degree of stability and predictability began to unravel, with treaties such as the INF collapsing amid mutual accusations of violations and the future of New START becoming uncertain, raising fears of a renewed arms race without clear rules or safeguards, while economic competition and sanctions warfare added another layer to the conflict, as the United States sought to isolate Russia financially and technologically, targeting its banks, energy sector, and elites in an effort to constrain its ability to project power, and Russia responded by deepening ties with non-Western partners, particularly China, promoting alternatives to the dollar-dominated financial system and leveraging its vast energy resources as a geopolitical tool, especially in relation to Europe, which found itself caught between dependence on Russian gas and alignment with U.S. strategic priorities, a tension that became even more pronounced with the outbreak of the large-scale war in Ukraine, which pushed U.S.-Russia relations to their lowest point since the Cold War, as Washington emerged as Kiev's principal supporter by providing military aid, intelligence, and economic assistance while framing the conflict as a fundamental struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, whereas Moscow portrayed the war as an existential fight against Western expansion and a necessary defense against what it described as an aggressive and hostile alliance seeking to weaken and dismantle Russia. And the consequences of this war have extended far beyond the battlefield, triggering global energy and food crises, driving inflation worldwide, and forcing many countries, particularly in the global south, to navigate a complex and polarized international environment where neutrality becomes increasingly difficult. And as rhetoric hardens and diplomatic channels narrow, the risk of miscalculation grows, with military incidents, cyber operations, and political provocations carrying the potential to escalate into direct confrontation between two nuclear-armed powers. A scenario that most leaders publicly claim to want to avoid yet seem increasingly unable to prevent through cooperative engagement. And despite this grim outlook, there remains a recognition among some policymakers and analysts that neither the United States nor Russia can achieve absolute victory over the other without catastrophic consequences, suggesting that the long-term resolution of their conflict will require a return to dialogue, arms control, and a reimagining of global security arrangements that acknowledge the interests and fears of all major players. Yet achieving such a shift appears extraordinarily difficult in a world marked by rising nationalism, eroding trust, information warfare, and competing visions of international order, making the U.S.-Russia conflict not only a defining feature of current global politics but also a powerful symbol of the broader struggle over how power is exercised, constrained, and justified in the 21st century. And until these deeper structural and ideological tensions are addressed, the rivalry between Washington and Moscow is likely to persist, shaping wars, alliances, economies, and the lives of millions across the globe for years to come.